Good evening. I'm Meg Samuelson, and it's my very great pleasure on behalf of the team of conveners to introduce this creative and critical symposium and to welcome you all in person and online to the University of Adelaide. We are delighted to be diving into southern waters on this warm December evening with a truly phosphorescent lineup of fiction, poetry, creative nonfiction, and music. We meet on unceded Ghana country and pay our deepest respects to elders and custodians of this shimmering land and sea country. We meet in the driest state of the driest continent on earth. We meet near the wetlands of the Coorong and between the glorious and degraded waters known to us today as the Torrens and the Murray. We meet in the bluest hemisphere of our wet planet. We meet on the shores of the great Southern Ocean, through which roiling waters were touched by the frozen continent. We meet between the Indian and Pacific Oceans, between two bodies of water that convened maritime worlds long before the Atlantic was navigated and the Euro-Atlantic world expanded to consume the South. This symposium is co-hosted by the Australian Research Council funded project between Indian and Pacific Oceans, Reframing Australian Literatures, on which Mandy Tregus and I are chief investigators. We are interested in the waters that flow in and out of Australia and in how they offer a medium for thinking between the southern continent and the lands of the global south. The symposium is co-hosted also by our research cluster, Stories from the South, in which we reflect on our location in South Australia and consider the vantage point that it offers for telling stories of here and elsewhere. With this event, we are pleased also to be launching a new research theme in the James Coetzee Centre for Creative Practice, which we have called South/South. Inspired by its patrons' assertion that the South is a unique world, the Coetzee Centre is interested in latitudinal practices of creativity and critique that emanate from the South and those which bring different selves into dynamic or oblique relation. Water, in its absence or abundance, defines the unique world of the South. But it's also good to think with and to create with, because it's not contained within it. Liquid, solid, and vaporous, water flows, circulates, and drifts across the planetary hydrosphere, conveying imaginaries and forms between north and south. We're thus delighted to be concluding this evening's proceedings with the performance of water music from the European tradition. Whether in its molecular structure or in the currents that wash across the planet, water is characterized by its unique capacity to cluster into vast networks, conveying things and creating connections. We've tried to emulate its practices in the symposium, concentrating attention on the South while flowing outwards and combining into wider networks. We wanted to bring people together in immersive environments while reaching out across various territorial borders. To this end, we've curated a blended symposium that will move through different venues and take different formats over the 3 days, some of which will inevitably be more satisfying for virtual audiences and others for live audiences. We apologize in advance for any failings in the interface, and we hope that you'll bear with us if we run into technical snags. Tonight, for instance, will feature a mix of audio and audiovisual content, as well as a mix of live and pre-recorded readings. And there'll be some variability to the sound and image quality, depending on what you're listening to and watching and where. Before we begin, some thanks to my fellow conveners, Mandy Tregus, Maggie Tonkin, Madeline Says, Theodora Galanis, Matthew Houghton, and Nicholas Joes. To our marvelous MC, Rachel Hennessy, with particular thanks for the heartfelt acknowledgement of country with which you opened the symposium. To our lovely student assistants, and particularly to Jane Costesi and Rachel Cairns for helping to guide us through the minefield of this blended format. To Anna Goldsworthy, Director of the Coetzee Centre, and Assistant Extraordinaire Jana Norman for their generous, efficient, and enthusiastic support. To the current and past Head of Humanities, Natalie Edwards and Jennifer Clark, who have both supported the research cluster Stories from the South, from which these waters first sprang. And last, but by no means least, Gail Jones, Michelle Kyle, Nicholas Joes, Jill Jones, Ivona Diambo, and Constantine Chamray. We are so grateful to you. Thank you for launching us into the waters. It is, after all, only appropriate that we should dive into such a richly storied and deeply acoustic substance through the creative imagination, and that we should seek our bearings in it through music. Before we return to our MC in the venue, we will begin with a recorded reading from Immersion by Gail Jones, who's joining us virtually from interstate. And with a reminder that full introductions to all our readers are included in the program notes.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to contribute to this wonderful event. For this reading, I have chosen a few small extracts from an art catalogue essay that I wrote several years ago. The essay was in response to an exhibition called Floating Life by painter Jo Derbyshire. Her paintings are mostly of underwater, almost all in the Southern Ocean, but for a few contrasting images of frozen northern hemispherical sites. And my original article was called Immersion. Here's a small extract. Art is given to the affirmation of misrecognition. It is the task of the artist to see things awry, to entertain the strange, to cast vision unknowing into foreign zones. Early sailors, made vulnerable by long sea voyages in which they spent months on the ocean without sighting land, occasionally succumbed to a peculiar form of delusional misrecognition called calenture, in which they believed the ocean was a kind of green rolling field. They so desired land and stability and earth beneath their feet that they would fling themselves overboard in ecstatic delirium. While this is a pathology, a confusion of haptic and psychic lives, it is also an experience of the fabulous and was often described in terms of awe and wonderment, as though what was being enacted was a mysterious and irresistible return, sometimes to the maternal. William Wordsworth, for example, wrote of the ocean as a breast and a couch in which one sank inflamed in the depths of limpid floods. Herman Melville, writing in Moby Dick in 1851, described calenture as the product of a mystic mood in which fact and fancy interpenetrate and form a seamless whole. The delusion of calenture comes to mind in viewing these paintings, not because they're about death or wild fleeing madness, but because they envision the ocean as a congenial, inviting space, one in which imagination is intensified and profoundly lives. Jo Derbyshire's sea spaces suggest a wish to inhabit the submarine, artistically at least, as surely as we would do the land, and to find in it forms of arousal, pleasure, and aesthetic experience. Her images of submersion are deeply seductive. There are no horizons here, only dreamlike, drifting, and dimensionless apparitions, gorgeous in their palettes and engulfing in their planes and spaces. The forms are both familiar and unfamiliar. Submarine life is the fantastic other to the terrestrial, as night is today. So that there are efflorescing blooms, semi-transparent entities, organic flotsam and jetsam streaming in invisible currents. These have an iconic attraction, but are also mysteriously impalpable, as if we know they are finally a vision and unable to be touched. So I suppose my first response was a kind of gratitude at being reminded of the apparition of life, one in which we might dissolve, see anew, be taken by the soft, vast force of another element, down, deep down, into a new sensorium of the imaginary. Ukiyo-e, the floating world. The term for the genre of fingerprints of the floating world, ukiyo-e, refers to images from the Edo period, 1603 to 1867, of which Hiroshige and Hokusai are perhaps the best known practitioners in the West. Centered in the Yoshiwara district of what is now modern Tokyo, the images were often of urban pleasure seeking, tea houses, kabuki, erotic, well-dressed encounters, and so on. Nothing like the asocial and otherworldly realms Jodoba depicts. Yet what she has derived from Japanese art is the redolence of the phrase floating world as a signifier, not of ephemeral middle-class pastimes, but a totalizing experience and a new point of view. What would it mean to see from a position of flotation, drift, and watery sensibility? What would it mean, that is to say, to literalize the metaphor? The images derive from sea diving and the contemplation of the allotropic states of water, its capacity to steam and condense, its anamorphic effects, the filtering of light rays, particles, and damping reflections. Particularly captivating for the artist is the special effects lighting that produces bright illumination against a very dark background, or the repetition of lozenge shapes or peak shapes, such as occur when light strikes ripples or filters through undulations. Earlier work favors bioluminescent sprinklings and strings of pearls becoming hoops of light, parallel wavelines and chrysanthemum-like patterns, such as figure in the blue and green designs of traditional Japanese body tattooing, also occurring in a shimmering radiance. So although these are dark images overall, they are also sparkling and oddly illuminate, reminding us of elements intersecting water, light, and the material body. And the sumptuousness of marine forms and reef life glimpsed in situ. One of the great pleasures of diving is to see the light patterning one's own body, to stretch out an arm and see it lined in fluctuating ropes of brightness, shifting as the body shifts in a fleeting photography. Life and death. When we dive or snorkel, we enter an enwreathing paradox. There is a kind of pacific quietness to deep underwater, but also the rhythmic amplification of our own breathing. So too, there is a sense of emancipation, entering a space of caress, released from air gravity and the impediments of land, and also of transgression, danger, and even death. We are seeing the kingdom of the drowned as well as of sea life. We are witnessing the lovely and the creepy, the generative and the derelict. Non-Euclidean maths deals with spaces that are curved and boundless. There is this sense here of space made round and enwrapping, an altered physics of the body and the eye. So Derbyshire is above all interested in the flamboyant excess of underwater life, its ardent suggestiveness. What might happen when one sees iridescence, photonic amethyst and silver light co-joining? What hypersensitive states we might enter and enjoy. There are also paintings of ice, of frozen lakes and glaciers, of white northern landscapes and chilled flat skies. Frozen images contain shapes that are vaguely menacing and sharp. Water gone hard is a symbol of arrested life, and it is also water stratified, serrated, caught streaming by a seasonal seizure in time. These images are seductive as death is, the call of quiet, of stillness, of everything settled finally settled into fixed shapes. The virtuosity of her vision allows her to include these wonderful reversals of the warm sensuality of South Australian waters. One thinks of Adrian Rich's poem, Diving in the Wreck. I came to see the damage that was done and the treasures that prevail. Damage and treasure, the two possibilities of underwater. In 1987, the Perth rock band The Triffids produced an album called Calenture. There's no song by that name on the album, but it included one called Holy Water, blue girl in a summer dress in the greenhouse, where she overslept dreaming of an ocean like a meadow but wet with holy water. This is a somewhat casual and mischievous reference, but it suggests a thread of preoccupation with what submersion might mean and why it might entrance us. There's a suggestion here too of sexual wetness and dreaming awake, the way in which moments of entering underwater, seeing our own oxygen made visible in bluish bubbles, watching a vast and extraordinary world unveil, might be one of the few remaining forms of sublimity and an encounter that reconnects vision and embodiment. Thank you.
So now I'd like to welcome on stage Michelle Carr, and she's going to do a reading for us.
Good evening, everyone, and it's a great honour to be here today, and I'd like to thank the organisers, especially Meg and also. I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners, the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, their elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for their custodianship, their laws and their languages. And I stand with and support all First Nations people and people of colour in their fight against racism and its crimes, the erasure of languages and stories, which are the threads of our families' lives. I'm going to be reading this evening from my novel, Daisy and Wolf, which will be appearing next year with Hachette. And I'll be reading at the moment from a section at it tells the story, I'll tell you what it's about. It tells the story of Daisy Simmons, a minor character of Indian origin in Mrs. Dalloway, Virginia Woolf's novel, and it follows her story, and she travels from Calcutta to England, and this section is set in Malta. In the Lazaretto, where they're quarantined. Lazaretto, Islotto, Malta, 16th of May, 1924. They offered Burgundy with our evening meals last night. I drank 2 glasses using the Egyptian currency I had acquired in Port Said. The wine floated in my veins as the hours lapsed into nightfall. I dreamt of where the dead children go after fever sucks the body dry. Charlotte came, her hair bouncing around her bright eyes, and I was a young mother feeding again. We are being held in the Lazaretto, an island hospital nestled in the harbour facing Valletta, where the ship was supposed to coal. The port authorities have quarantined the ship and ordered that it be fumigated to prevent the transmission of cholera. We were told that there's been an epidemic in Alexandria and Port Said where new passengers boarded. There was much confusion among crew and passengers and a good deal of frustration when the yellow flag was placed on the ship and we were bundled into groups and rowed in boats across Mars-Mexed harbour to the health office. Most of the Europeans were in a state of disbelief as they had been preparing to disembark. Clothing, portmanteaus, all our foods and cottons and other cargoes were confiscated. Captain Finlay warned us that we might be waylaid by 40 days at worst, though he is hopeful that he will be able to negotiate our release soon. I had been listless, dozing off to the sea's lapping and rhythmic fathoms. It is almost noon, and the little blonde-haired boy follows me from the main dormitory. The beds are aligned in rows, almost touching. People's belongings are tied in bundles or covered with a shawl. Some of the adults and children are asleep. They lie with flannels on their foreheads, their mouths open, jugs of clean water by their cots. Mertica and Prem are washing undergarments with water drawn from a well, our quota checked by the matron. I have seen how the boy accompanies her on her rounds. She takes temperatures, checks the skin, gums, and dryness of the tongue, writing it all down. He stands barefoot by her side. Sometimes he tugs at her dress, his neck pulled in. Sometimes he brings her a jug of water to sponge the sick, or a file tied with string, or a thermometer. Each morning she arrives 2 or 3 hours after dawn, except for today being Sunday. Roosters crowed rudely, unperturbed by the church bells. A few more girls are outside the cattle sheds collecting grass to feed their goats. Ellen and Mrs. Squires and a group of English women are playing shuttlecock on the asphalt square. The boy's shadow is thrown behind mine as we walk past a few men in singlets. Men who are sitting languidly on sacks, a chessboard perched atop a crate between them. They keep their gaze fixed on the board, except for when they are not considering turns. Then, as if the harbour holds the key to their next move, they watch the flotilla. Rowboats come and go, carrying cargo, mail, and supplies for the sick. A long corridor leads to the terrace. A sign hanging from the wooden door reads, "Vietato l'ingresso." It is heavy to push open, but I manage. We have been warned there are penalties for breaking the restrictions and curfews. The best way to describe the room is that it's like entering a disfigured cathedral. Cracks in the partition wall, the stonework discoloured and in disrepair. From one side, the grassy slope leads to an enclosed courtyard railed off and beyond to an assortment of buildings and stairwells. From the corner side, peeling archways afford a breathtaking aspect of the sea. At first, it was easy to lose my bearings in this rusting, sea-washed labyrinth, which until recently has served as a naval hospital. It has also been the chambers in exile for notable dignitaries. There is a storehouse, the stanza Profumo, where all incoming letters are destined to be smoked with vinegar, the envelopes slit open. There is a small chapel and a cemetery. Swallows nesting in the eaves have left their droppings. Their cries echo in the harbour as they make passage. Fringed clouds hug the sky, stencilled by the golden light, and the waves surround us, lapping and crashing against the soft stone of this long atrium. The boy polishes an apple against the cotton shirt he's wearing under his braces With a shy movement, he offers it to me. I catch his nervous brown eyes. They sparkle without a trace of sadness or fear, as if they are acquainted with strange apparitions. When things go missing here, they say it is the work of poltergeists. These buildings are haunted by the ghosts of those who have died and are forgotten, buried in the sea or shot by the quarantine guards, those whose names are etched into the soft stone. The boy runs away. He disappears behind a buttressed wall. I twist the stem of the apple and bite into it, hungry for the sweet, juicy flesh. We have not eaten much fruit in the last week. The food is very poor. We are given bread, cheese, pastries, over-salted stews served like porridge. My teeth tingle as I chew the crisp apple and my mouth pools with saliva. It runs, dribbling from the lower lip. I wipe it off with the side of my hand. "E buono?" the boy asks, smiling. Has he been hiding in the lemon tree? He appears between one of the arches with a mischievous look, his hair teased by the wind. I notice for the first time his thick eyelashes. "Bene grazie," I say, but then he disappears again. He plays this game with me, appearing fleetingly, then disappearing between the archways on the garden side of the terrace. The lustre of sunlight and the wonder of his laughter eases my feelings of indignation at being kept here. I, who am broken and almost childless, have I forgotten what it is to be a mother so soon, with so little remorse? Bells are chiming from the Valletta side of the harbour, from a chapel where a Catholic mass is being held. There is a fine dust in the humid air and the sweet, sickly smell of the baked earth rising from the ground. The boy returns. He squats on a slab of stone, his elbows on his knees, his face cupped in his hands the way Joseph liked to squat. Once, when he was tired of walking with me after shopping at Cuthbertson's shoe shop, he squatted just like that until I bought him some macaroons from the bazaar. As the boy watches me, that memory returns. I begin to curve my body into one of the alcove windows. It feels like I'm floating in the turquoise sea, luminous and rhythmic, lapping at the soft, rusting stone walls. It seems like a lifetime has passed since I took up the pen to write. Strange how we devote a lifetime in dreaming and in waiting for what is often beyond our reach. England is not so far. I believe this journey will end the way that when a woman conceives, there is such a stretch of time and patience that the pregnancy feels infinite, even though birth is inevitable. One way or another, dead or alive, the birth is destined to happen. I steady the nib of my fountain pen and write. I have been waiting so long for this separation to end, when it seems now to have been a rather futile wish. The sea teaches us nothing that is permanent, not distance nor landfall, nothing, only death and love.
Hello there, it's Jill Jones here. Greeting to all at the opening of this marvellous symposium, and apologies I can't be there in person. Circumstances have made me a touch immobile temporarily. First, I want to acknowledge that I'm reading on unceded Kaurna land, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Most of my poems will be on the wet side of things. I start and end at the beach, but there's a detour into the dry as well. And apologies, even though this is pre-recorded, I will make errors, but that just makes it a little bit more lively, doesn't it? First poem, Saltwater Kin. As water turns and returns, it changes from ocean, ground and sky onto these beachside rocks. As I taste salt water, kin of saliva, a memory of exploring rock pools. I look into today's pools, They're swirled clear or gathered with irritant like pearl. A surge catches in sandstone, sings hollows where submerged grasses weep. Posidonia sinuosia, Heterozostra tasmanica. What is a wave but a moment and a continuum? As wordless language, swell, pitch, break, shaping its cold sweat on our cars, our skin, as the city rolls into the Gulf, abandoned water bottle in tide's reach. Stray sky water falls on my cheek. The truest fragment may be a raindrop. Even if not transparent, it carries so much. Maybe some days are grey for a reason, as this present fills up with pasts, sea past, bird past, fish trails, rain history, in clouds, vapour, brine, erosions, cinders of trees and ice tasting bitter, like everything we've had to swallow, like crust of the pink lake we once passed, clapped out memory of a green shore, slurries and shams hunched on cracked industrial edges. The sea has no nostalgia. Its currents undo everything, strew and scrape, leavings of the extinct, some things fresh, ice cream wrapper, old bricks turned to pebbles, new washed shells, plastic and forever colours, worn wood, cuttlebone. Today, seagulls steal garbage from our hands. We shout, hey, here, by the lagoon, sandhills, the pier, as landscapes stretch from us, watery, dry across the world. Will the clear water return? Until everything silts up, this is what we do. Cup water to our mouths and spill it for ground, right in this salt fresh tongue, turn over its ancient syllables without drowning. The next poem quotes from an article, Drugs in Our Waterways, the Bugs and Beyond, Bob Wong and Erin Richmond, and that's a reveal, we'll know what the poem's going to be about. And it also refers to old names for diseases, and you'll recognise them when I come to them. The poem is called River Contraindications. Even if I see and don't see the rivers writhing, the fish, daphnia, algae, the water, the swirling of Ritalin, warfarin, methotrexate. Even if I bend and don't bend to the flow, ingest bitter tasting wonders as do aquatic insects, riparian spiders soaked in memantine, codeine, fluconazole, meancerin. Even if the nerve system of antidotes flushes me with ticks, platypuses feed on the insect larvae that live on the creek bed, aggression, numbness, memory loss, unwanted rules of the algorithm, past the old flux of apoplexy, breakbone, dropsy, grief, grip, horrors, jawform, lethargy, lockjaw, nostalgia, palsy, quinsy, rickets, scurvy, spleen. Even if I know it's too much and not enough, with aging infrastructure, there's some leakage. With my own sweet body is all I offer, baptismal slough of perfume, cologne, skin lotion, sunscreen. Even if the nerve system of doses will cure my blurred vision, steroids move from cows to waterways through banks and sediments, tiredness, aches, anemia, unusual bruising. Even if my nerve system splits from its diminishing returns, silent, hardened, destroyed, duplicitous and dumb, I'm not quite lost, though I may not speak up. In that plagued flux, dying still navigates living. Welcome, stone fly larvae, leafy twig rush, all you tiddlers, everything as part of things, nothing to rule the earth but little ones. And let's see if I get through this one properly. It's a poem that contains no A or I vowels, and they're the two vowels in the word Adani, and it's a protest against the Adani Carmichael mine and its impact on the Great Barrier Reef. It's called Hope for Whole. No, no boomtown, no brown current, no smoky vessel, no swollen cooked mud, no slop shock, no money juggle, no ghost bloom, no blunt petrol hull, no smudge rock, no possess. Yes, keep the load under. Hope for old flows to grow. Polyp, sponge, weed, rock, mollusk, worm, turtle, dugong. Conserve, do not stress. Love the blue levels, the upswell, the fluent spheres under, gull sweep, storm hover, sky green fluxes, fresh flume. Defend exoskeletons, broken hydroforest, stop runoff, overuse. Don't cut holes under clouds. You new crown of thorns, go. No short-term clever, no smoke burn genus murder, be gone. Keep us hold whole. Let enfold of north to south, whole blue current, whole source flush blood, mother cells. Hope for whole country, not those who would strop or cull reef. Keep touch the swell deep course. Now the next poem is called Murray Andante, and just get it. Here we are. Here it is. And it's a poem I started drafting during the first year of living here in Adelaide permanently in 2008. And in fact, I was listening to Bach while I started the draft. It does refer to, I guess, weather back east in Sydney, which is where I came from. It's not named, but you get the drift of it. Murray Andante. The night fills with bark, with the clear cold a gas fire doesn't touch. Outside, rattle of a skateboard, not gelling with the violin. Skateboard guy, I've seen him before, rolls back towards Gilbert Street. The slow movement begins. It's not quite a Baroque town. The grid's almost classical, but the bark Andante claims it now the outside softens again, giving access somehow to measure of steady streets, lack of blue shadow, and a width of days, along with my steady lostness in a bowl of clarity, while above my eyes the green and grey hills need to stretch my thought, and rain suddenly hits the roof, then stops quick. All this noise that doesn't go to rivers, that doesn't cease the drought, nor bring me back to a mind that accompanies me once through punky allegros and andantes and other more human songs, unlike the passing of trams at Perry Street, as lawyers progress to sandstone courts where cameras linger, sensations of the local, a city's petty crimes, well, that's cross-continental, like the sad river, as even the blind hours remind me, killed state by state, classical neglect, not even this rain nor this music allays. And this next poem is a little experiment with thinking about dry and drought and cracked earth. And so it's made up of very short phrases of mostly 2 words, or indeed in a couple of cases 1 word. And it's called Shred. Cloud shreds, vary the filter shreds that hover, window from gravel weather, window from or GMO or blue, filter shreds, bark to drought ground, horsetails that hover, trucked past gravel weather. What kind horsetails for feral bird removal, bird blue, trick fields, GMO locust, mouse hover, bark drought, some years, grounds locust, mouse ewe, drive through, summer what, kind some, years what, kind, horsetails that hover, window from that trick of fields, not GMO, vary the cloud sound, or blue, drive through, kind as, leaves shed, bark summer, trucked past, horsetails, filter shreds, forecast fails, vary the filter shreds, clouds. And finally, we're back to the beach and the ocean. The repeated phrase in this poem, some say, echoes various translations of Sappho's famous fragment 16, which in some translations begins along the lines of, some say, an army of horsemen. But I'm, of course, thinking of armies or horsemen, people. It's a completely different idea. But maybe not. Go and read the Sappho fragment and see what you think. The poem is called Of What I'll Become. So some may say everything falls. Cities and repute, summer apricots, a small white plate, rain in the Gulf. The rough is more than smooth. Light is no more fleet than time. In fact, some say this glass on the shore is sharp or smooth, rough as broken stone, holds light as it holds time. Some say that tide was running out then back upon us. But who are we as plastic beings? Shells shaped around ventricles and nodes, blood, polymer, simple fear. Among this winter kelp, these shadows on the sand, pressed by futures and storms. And many thanks for listening to me, and enjoy the rest of the symposium.
Hey, welcome back everyone. We now have 2 more readings to go and some music. So I'm just going to ask Cardoso, I'm sure it'll be easy, to come up and brief us.
Thank you, Rachel. It's lovely to be here with everyone at the start of Southern Waters. An invocation. When I was a child, we used to go on family holidays to southern York Peninsula, southwest of Adelaide in South Australia. No crow would fly in that direction though. We drove north, then took a sharp turn south, and the road got worse, going nowhere except further south to a place vaguely called the Bottom End. A lighthouse on the extreme tip of the peninsula marked its limit. The light guided ships through the passage between the mainland and the islands off the coast, including Kangaroo Island. Captain Matthew Flinders named this stretch of water Investigator Strait after his own ship on the 29th of March, 1802. The Bottom End was good for excursions, with its imposing cliffs, spectacular beaches, wild seas, and those islands receding into the blue. It counted as remote in the 1960s, after the demise of a gypsum mine that had been operating since the 19th century, and before the area became what is now a popular park. The roads in were unreliable. It was easy to get stuck. You could make up your own stories. The most dramatic was the wreck of the Ethel, a multiple mishap in which the same ship was wrecked more than once in the same place, as were other ships that came to the rescue. The hulk abandoned on the beach aroused pity and terror. It was uncanny. The rusting anchor was a giant's plaything. But the most haunting story came from what people called the Chinaman's grave. This was a lone white grave on the headland above the little port where the gypsum from the mine was shipped out. The plaque read, Dao Tan, Le Tonkinois, died at sea, 25/3/40. We kids nicknamed this Chinaman Leo Down and wondered about him. I later learned that he was a sailor on a French ship that transported gypsum to Noumea, where it was used in plaster for building. Dao Tan was from Tonkin, then part of French Indochina, now Vietnam, Indo-Chinese if you like, living in a French-speaking periphery of the greater Chinese world, then at war. The Chinese character Xian, immortal, is carved on the white headstone of the grave, white being the Chinese colour for mourning. Dao Tan was 27 when he was killed in an accident on board ship, apparently knocked on the head by a moving sack of coal. His fellow crew were Tonkinese too, Buddhist, and objected to burial at sea for their compatriot. And so the ship called into Stenhouse Bay and a Buddhist ceremony was improvised on shore. Dao Tan's body was carried down the long jetty and up the steep path to be laid in its grave in a coffin made by a local carpenter. Officialdom did not need to be notified. Later on, the dead man's family sent offerings to be placed on the grave, which you can still see there today, a wreath of glass tears. In 1997, the Vietnamese community of South Australia added another plaque to commemorate Dao Tan, the first Vietnamese to arrive at York Peninsula, South Australia. There's not much more than that, except that travellers continue to visit the site as pilgrims. The British naval practice of sea burial is alien to Chinese and Buddhist belief. Death by water is feared. Drowned souls become hungry ghosts, looking to seize on surrogates among the living to take their place. As Hong Kong author P.K. Leung writes, there are dead souls roaming the three worlds, and there are demons wherever the sea meets the land. If we can offer prayers for the souls of the deceased, if we can release them from their suffering and help them to cross over to a new dimension of being, then perhaps we can hope to restore something of the orderly light of the cosmos. Leung was moved by the drowning deaths of 23 Chinese copper pickers at Morecambe Bay in Britain in 2004, Chinese migrants in search of a better life. You may have seen Isaac Julien's immersive film installation, 10,000 Waves, which connects the tragedy of the drowned workers with Chinese myths of peril and protection at sea, traversing time as well as maritime space. As kids, we played a game called 7 Ways to Die about a spot near Cape Spencer Lighthouse where signs warned about the unstable cliff top and dangerous seas. The ground could crumble beneath your feet. You could be bashed to death on the rocks below. You could have a heart attack on the way down. You could drown. You could be eaten by sharks. If you survived, you would perish anyway from hunger and cold. Does that make 7? Even buried on shore, the Chinaman's presence seemed to trouble those waters. It was not the only association with China along that coast. Near the shack where we stayed on those family holidays was a place known as the Drain, for a channel dug through to the sea to remove swamp water from arable land. Chinese were said to have smoked and dried fish and grown vegetables there. The movement of Chinese in and out along Australia's coasts is part of the history of Australia as it intersects with the political and economic upheavals of China. The mobility of goods as well as people along southern maritime trading routes has been recurrent, although not always in sight or welcome. It crosses the horizon of knowledge and imagination as the gaze looks south. At the Drain, fresh water comes up through the sand on the beach at certain times, like the jets in a spa. Fresh water comes up through salt water. A similar phenomenon occurs on the western side of Arnhem Bay in East Arnhem Land in the Northern Territory. It is a sacred and restricted area where fresh water springs to the surface of the beach in an area only exposed at low tide. In special ceremonies, a larakich, a memorial pole, is placed over the mouth of the spring at low tide, and the water from this sacred font bubbles up over the top. This is a symbolic cleansing of the land and people, a release of social tension caused by festering dispute, a living manifestation of the ecstatic peace of harmonious justice, writes Will Stubbs of the cleansing work that Yolngu artist Garrowan performs. It comes with ancient knowledge. For many of us, stories of the South are ancestral stories, born of separation, difference, and distance, yet capable of speaking to an ecstatic piece of harmonious justice. The dream of an ancestral South beyond land borders that we can all perhaps share. Let me end with a shark story from The Crossing by Luis Cardoso, a writer who grew up in East Timor around the time I was growing up here on Ghana and Narungga land. His father, a nurse, was assigned to work on the prison island of Atauro, offshore from Dili. The family makes the crossing at night, along with a political prisoner and a guard or pacifier who is a former African freedom fighter deported from Mozambique. The old Timorese steersman in charge of the boat blows a conch to call for a supernatural being to fill the sails. The author, still a child, watches as Sumal, the nervous prisoner, sees lights approaching the boat, the gleaming eyes of the fish, the young tuna, and the sharks that rub against the wooden hull. His face fills with fear. "It's all right," says the old man. "They're less dangerous than men. They know everything. They're the ones who guide the boat. They follow the sea currents. We learn how to navigate from them." It was said that no native of Atauro had ever been attacked by a shark unless he or she was under a curse or had offended some custom, creature, or ancestor. Night passes, the sun comes up, they make it. The old man wakes the prisoner from his sleep and tells him to wash. As he leaned over, he saw a shape in the blue depths, as long and white as a scimitar. Hands poised above the water, he stared at the shark coming in his direction. He remained absolutely still. The shark stopped inches from the surface. They looked at each other hard, like two passers-by trying to remember where they had seen each other before, flipping quickly through their respective memories. Then the shark performed a pirouette as if to show itself off and swam away. Before disappearing completely, it turned one last time to study Sumal's attitude and expression. "He wanted to meet you." It was the old man's voice. "You've just received your first visit from my ancestor. A courtesy call, if you like. In that spirit, I invoke the name of the Chinaman."
So now we're going to have our last reading, which is again a recorded reading from Yvonne Aduango Awa. She has recorded this from Berlin, where she's in residency at the moment.
The Dragonfly Sea. The author's note. In 2005, also the 600th anniversary of the Ming Dynasty's Great Admiral Zheng He's first voyage around the Western Indian Ocean, a young woman from Pate Island, Kenya, obtained a scholarship to study in China. The award was given based on family claims and DNA tests that suggested that she was indeed a descendant of a Ming Dynasty sailor who had survived a storm-wrought shipwreck and who, with others, had found refuge and a sense of belonging on Pate Island. The Dragonfly Sea is inspired by this historical incident. Take this amulet, child, and secure it with cord and honor. I will make you a chain of radiant pearl and coral. I will give you a clasp, fine without flaw, to wear on your neck. Wash and perfume yourself and braid your hair. String jasmine and lay it on the counterpane. Adorn yourself in clothes like a bride and wear anklets and bracelets. Sprinkle rose water on yourself. Have rings on your fingers and always henna on the palms of your hands. Mwana Kupona Bitim Mshan, translated by J.W. Allen, and I adapted it. Chapter 1. Roho ni mgeni. The soul is a visitor. To cross the vast ocean to their south, water-chasing dragonflies with forebears in northern India had hitched a ride on a sedate in-between seasons morning wind, one of the monsoon's introits, the Mathlai. One day in 1992, 4 generations later, under dark purplish blue clouds, this fleeting being settled on the mangrove-fringed southwest coast of a little girl's island. The Mathlai conspired with a shimmering full moon to charge the island, its fishermen, prophets, traders, seamen, sea women, healers, shipbuilders, dreamers, tailors, madmen, teachers, mothers, and fathers with a fretfulness that mirrored the slow churning turquoise sea. Dusk stalked the Lamu archipelago's largest and sullenest island, trudging from Siu on the north coast, appending Kizingitini's fishing fleets before swooping southwest to brood over a patted town that was already moldering in the malaise of unrequited yearnings. Bruised by endless deeds of guile, siege, war, and seduction, like the island that contained it, patted town marked melancholic time. A leaden sky poured dull red light over a crowd of petulant ghosts, dormant feuds, forfeited glories, invisible roads, and congealing millennia-old conspiracies. Weaker light leached into ancient crevices, tombs, and ruins, and signaled to a people who were willing to cohabit with tragedy, trusting that time transformed into cataclysms, into echoes. Deep inside Pate, a cock crowed, and from the depths of space, a summons, the azan crescendoed. Sea winds tugged at the little girl's lemon green headscarf, revealing dense black curly hair that blew into her eyes. From within her mangrove hideout, the scrawny 7-year-old, wearing an oversized floral dress that she was supposed to grow into, watched dense storm clouds hobble inland. She decided that these were a monster's footsteps, a monster whose strides left streaks of pink light on the sky. Seawater lapped at her knees, and her bare feet sank into the black sand as she clutched another scrawny being, a purring, dirty white kitten. She was betting that the storm, her monster, would reach land before a passenger-laden dhow, now muddling its way towards the cracked wharf to the right of her. She held her breath. Homecomers, she called all passengers. Wajio. The child could rely on such homecomers to be jolted like marionettes whenever there was a hint of rain. She giggled in anticipation as the mid-sized dhow, with Bikidude painted in flaking yellow, eased into the creek. Scattered soft raindrops. The thunder spirit and rumbling caused every homecomer to raise his or her eyes skyward and squawk like a hornbill. The watching girl sniggered as she stroked her kitten, pinching its fur in her thrill. It mewed. Shh, she whispered back as she peered through mangrove leaves, the better to study the passengers' drizzle-blurred faces, a child looking for and gathering words, images, sounds, moods, colors, conversations, and shapes, which she could store in one of the shelves of her soul to retrieve later and reflect upon. Every day, in secret, she went to and stood in the portals of this sea, her sea. She was waiting for someone. The girl now moved the kitten from her right to her left shoulder. Its extra large blue eyes followed the dance of 8 golden dragonflies hovering close by. Thunder. The dhow drew parallel to the girl, and she fixated on a man in a cream-colored suit who was slumped over the vessel's edge. She was about to cackle at his discomfort when a high and hurried voice intruded. Ayana! Her surveillance of the man was interrupted as lightning split the sky. Ayana! It was her mother. Ayana! At first, the little girl froze, then she crouched low, almost kneeling in the water, and stroked her kitten. She whispered to it, "Hi, Guru, don't mind. She can't see us." Ayana was supposed to be recovering from a morning asthma attack. Bimonira, her mother, had rubbed clove oil over her tightened chest and stuffed the all-ailment-treating black kalonji seeds into her mouth. They had sat together naked under a blanket while a pot of steaming herbs, which included eucalyptus and mint, decongested their lungs. Ayana had gulped down air and blocked her breath to swallow 6 full tablespoons of cod liver oil. She had gurgled a bitter concoction and been lulled to sleep by her mother's dulcet do, do, do. She had woken up to the sounds of her mother at work, the tinkle of glass, brass, and ceramic, the aroma of rose, clove, langi-langi, and moonflower, and the lilts of women's voices inside her mother's rudimentary home-based beauty salon. Ayana had tried. She had half-napped until a high-pitched sea wind pierced and scattered her reverie. She had heard far-off thunder, but she had pinned herself to the bed until the persistent beckoning of the storm proved irresistible. Then she rolled out of bed, arranged extra pillows to simulate her body, and covered these with sheets. She squeezed out of a high window and shimmied down drain pipes, clumped to the crumbling coral wall. On the ground, she found the kitten she had rescued from a muddy drain several days ago, stretched out on their doorstep. She picked it up and planted it on her right shoulder, dashed off to the seafront, and finally swung north to the mangrove section of the creek, from where she could spy on the world and sea. Ayana! The wind cooled her face. The kitten purred. Ayana watched the dhow. The cream-suited elderly stranger lifted his head. Their eyes connected. Ayana ducked, pressing into the mangrove shadows, her heart racing. How had that happened? Ayana! Her mother's voice was closer. Where's that child? Ayana! Must I talk to God? Ayana looked toward the boat and again at the blackening skies. She would never know what landed first, the boat or the storm. She remembered the eyes that had struck hers. Would their owner tell on her? She scanned the passageway looking for those eyes again. The kitten on her shoulder pressed its face into her neck. Ayana! Akia Mungu! Ay! The threat-drenched contralto came from the bushes to the left of the mangroves. Ay mwanangu! Bonawani Tessa, too close. The girl abandoned her cover, splashed through the low tide to reach open suns. Ayana scrambled from stone to stone with the kitten clinging to her neck. She dropped out of sight. The stranger, a man from Nanjing, saw a small creature soar against the backdrop of the black sky, hover and then fall like a broken off bough. As she did so, a long chortle erupted out of him. His fellow travelers, already sympathetic about his chronic seasickness, glanced at him with unease. It was not uncommon for seasickness to turn previously sane persons into lunatics. The man focused on the land, eyes active in his placid face. A cataract in his right eye gave it a luminosity in his balding head on his tendon-lined neck. He turned at the sound of a woman's calling voice. Ayana! Stomach royal, craving the sense of land, he tried to measure the distance between the boat and the jetty, hoping that they would dock soon. 15 minutes later, ill-fitting suit aflutter, the visitor stepped off the boat. He had to wade through shallow water to reach the black sand shore. Even though anonymous hands helped him forward, he stumbled. His hands touched the soil. He swallowed air. Here was the rustling of ghosts. Here was the lonely humming of those who had died far from home and had for far too long been neither sought nor remembered. A brown hand dangled in front of his face. He took it. One of the sailors helped him up before handing over his single gray bag. The man intoned, "Ichifanki imezingatiwa," and then chortled at a secret joke. The traveler blinked, uneasy and engulfed by redolent evening scents. Oozy sputtered enchantment. His breath discerned bitter orange, sweet balsam, and the sweat of the sea blended in a dense air that also heated his bones. Succumbing, inhaling, he then tilted his head towards the hubbub of human arrivals. He heard the music of a rolling tide. He glimpsed an almost storm hovering on the horizon. What was this place? He ambled forward, heels rotating as if his toes had roving eyes. Pale light shone on a pink petal falling from a solitary and slender wild rose bush. The man faltered. He waited for the petal to settle on the ground before reaching for it. Only then did he lift it to his lips. enclosing it in one hand while the other adjusted the condensed contents of a life that fit into the canvas bag hanging from his shoulder. End of chapter 1.
So we're going to finish tonight with some music. Constantine Chinaman. And he's going to come up and introduce his work to us.
After these wonderful readings, two pieces, two works associated with water. One, presumably with fresh water, and one with salt water, I guess. The first piece is by Claude Debussy, French composer, and it's called Reflections in Water, from first volume of Immersion. And there's nothing specific to say about this piece except for there's also, as reflections we can see in the water, there is reflections of bells. So there are always bells going throughout the piece. The second work is by contemporary of Debussy, Maurice Ravel, also French. And this work is called Undine, from Gaspard de la Nuit. Undine is the same as mermaid, I guess. So they almost even start a similar, same key. Please enjoy.